BREWtally Speaking podcast is proudly sponsored by Rockabilia.com. For over 30 years, Rockabilia has been the go-to destination for all things band merch. With over 500,000 items in their online store and collaborations with today's hottest bands, you're sure to find something you love. Use our code BREW10 at checkout and take 10% off your total order. So go pick up your favorite new piece of merch now over at Rockabilia.com. And now, on to the show.
Say you have to have a lot of passion for what you're doing. This rings true because it's so hard that if you don't, any rational person would give up. It's really hard, and you have to do it over a sustained period of time. So if you don't love it, and if you're not having fun doing it, you're gonna give up.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the BREWtally Speaking podcast. I am your host, John, and this episode's guest is Lee Jennings of the Funeral Portraits. Honestly, I can't really imagine you not knowing who Lee is, or at least not having heard the Funeral Portrait. Because seriously, they are about everywhere in tour. They are all over Octane. They are all over local terrestrial radio. They have just really blown up in the last, half a year or so. And as you're going to hear, I reference a conversation Lee did a few years ago with good friend Scott Bowling over at Good Company with Bowling. And it was really interesting because I remember at the time kind of casually checking in, Scott posts his episodes and so forth. And I just remember Lee had a very interesting look, still does. And just kind of being like, oh, I don't know this band. The name sounds really interesting. And I checked it out, and I just remember being like, the thing, even back then, that I thought was really admirable and just stood out to me was the conviction that Lee speaks with. He is one of those people, through the various interviews I've heard him do, and even just talking to him myself in this chat, he's very determined. He is someone who knows what he wants. And he will get it. It may not be right away, but he will get there. And that was something even back then, a few years ago, before the band really was breaking, that really stood out to me, was that he didn't let his idea of what the Funeral Portrait was going to become in his mind, he didn't let it deter him. Whether it was, we have to change the sound a little bit, we have to change maybe some members who aren't as committed as myself and others. Like, he knew what he needed to do to get there and how to achieve what he sees in his brain when coming up with the songs and what the band was going to be. And he never compromised. And I think there's so many young bands that when they're trying to forge their own way, not only just as a band, but as people, it's hard. It's hard to know that. And that's something that even back then I thought was just like, wow, this kid is going to make it. Like, it may not be in the current iteration of this band. It may not even be with the Funeral Portrait, but there's something about him that he will make it. And here we are a couple years later from that interview, and it's happening. And it is really great to see. It is great to see someone who is kind of just, I don't know, it literally, I mean, the band's getting ready to go out with Ice Nine Kills here in a couple of months on their basically 2 nights of horror, 2 nights of terror, I believe is what the tour is called, where basically Ice Nine is doing 2 nights of residency in a couple of cities, and the first night, which is with the Funeral Portraits playing, and obviously Spencer is on, Welcome to Suffocate City, and it's a thing where it's another band. Like, they just remind me of that. Like, I know I've said this story ad nauseum on this show, but seeing Ice Nine and seeing Spencer kind of be the same way, where it was like, well, this person can't quite commit to the touring schedule we're doing, so we're going to get somebody else. And I know what this band's going to be, and I have a vision for it. And here we are years later, and Ice Nine is one of the bigger bands in the scene, are undeniably so, and even creating music that may not be the most palatable, but somehow it is, and it's gaining traction. And I'm seeing it with the Funeral Portrait. It feels kind of like sort of the second coming of Ice Nine Kills as far as what it is. But the Funeral Portrait is doing something that I think is oddly nostalgic in that it feels something like a My Chem or like Thursday or some of these more emo leaning bands of the late 90s, early 2000s that like I would have been growing up without coming out of high school. But it has something that even those bands didn't have. And that's what kind of makes it feel fresh and new. And just overall, it has me very excited. So without further ado, let's get into my conversation with Lee, and I'll talk to you on the other side of it.
Oh, cool. Sick. There we go. So he told me that you're rad. So
I hope so, and that kind of is a great segue right into the first thing. So it's funny. I feel like this has kind of been a long time coming because we have some other mutual friends in Scott Bowling, Nathan Mowry, and all of those, and Mikey from Islander, who have all
Literally
I've been
the
on
man.
Scott's show, and Nathan and everyone else have all been on this show. So
I love that. That's so cool. Well, thanks for having me.
yeah. It's funny though, because in thinking about the episode you did with Scott, you know, there's kind of something in general, I feel like, between you guys, like Silly Goose, and you know, that you guys are kind of all kind of popping off right now and kind of representing for the Atlanta, like, you know, Georgia areas. And I feel like when I think of that area for me musically, you know, being 40 now, that it's like you look at a band like Mastodon, you look at like what, you know, T.I. was doing, Outkast was doing, like all these groups, and it's so eclectic regardless of genre, that I wonder, what is it about that area to you that you think breeds a certain type of creativity?
That's actually, I love that question. Thank you for that. So it's weird. So for me, like growing up in Atlanta, I really was obsessed with local music, right? Like bands that did nothing. Okay. I'm not talking like Norma Jean, Mastodon, you know, like that kind of stuff. I'm literally talking about like bands that would sell out like, you know, like a 100 cap club, you know? So for me, I don't know. I just grew up loving the local scene so much. I was so involved in it. Um, you know, and it's crazy because I think a little bit we have this I think to be honest, I think all the bands from Atlanta have something to prove. You know, it's not like we're not like you know, LA or New York City or Nashville or you know, where else is there so many bands from? Like Cleveland, right? Or like, you know, Cincinnati. Like I feel like Ohio breeds a lot of rock music, you know?
Yeah.
So like for me, I think a lot of this is like us getting to like prove to the rest of the world or America, you know, that like Atlanta can be like a rock staple is really cool, you know. And it's weird because like it's so funny because you talk about like Silly Goose, you know. I've known them forever. I recorded their first ever songs in
Okay.
my studio that I have at my house, so it's so funny.
Yeah, I just feel like, you know, Atlanta is like my wife and I's favorite place to go. We're actually going to go in about 2 months again. We usually try to at least get down once a year.
I
But it
love
was
that.
kind of funny as you're like sort of mentioning that it's sort of this kind of has the same vibe a little bit of like, you know, bigger markets necessarily. It's funny because like the area we stay in, typically East Atlanta, like Little Five Points, I feel that that is almost an extension of a lot of the places you were just saying. And we just came back from Nashville like a few weeks ago. And I feel that. Like, I feel like when I go to these places, I'm like, oh, this is like, there was a spot in Nashville we were staying at, like, that's over more of like East Nashville, I think is
Yep.
technically what it's called.
Oh yes,
But
East
I was like,
Nashville's like the place.
yeah. And it feels kind of funny because like when we were like at a few bars and like there's little pockets of like venues, like little DIY venues and stuff. I'm like, this feels like East Atlanta, Little Five Points, like where it's like I forget what the venue is across from like the Vortex, but like over there or like the Earl
Star
over
Bar.
in
Yep.
yeah. And so it's like, and then even like Elmere kind of like that's my favorite bar, but like the theater that's right next to that, like it just kind of breeds creativity and art, for lack of a better
Yeah.
term, as a whole. And I just constantly wonder, like, do you feel that as an artist, like growing up there, or is it something I just recognize being an outsider?
Yes and no. I got I think for me a lot of it was just, you know, it is I do agree with you. You know, I think those areas are very important to us. You know, I would remember being younger, going to Little Five Points, you know, going to Young Man's Daughter or, you know, whatever it is. And then when I was finally old enough to go to the Vortex, you know, because you have to be 21. And when I was first freshly 21. It was smoking inside. That's why it was 21 and up. And then when they stopped allowing the smoking inside, it was so funny because they stopped allowing the smoking inside, but they still were like, screw it, we're still 21 and up, which I'm very thankful for, you know. But it's one of those things that I just think it's the city life thing, right? Which, don't get me wrong, I don't live in the city. I live in the suburbs. I don't know that many people who actually live in the city. My whole life, everybody did not live in the city. You know what I mean? And for us, I think it's just like places like the Masquerade, right? Like that, you know, places like the Tabernacle, or
Yep.
places like what you said, like the Sar Bar, the Drunken Unicorn. You know, there's all these spots in Atlanta that live and breathe DIY, which is still very important to our band. Even though we're signed to a label, even though we do these big tours, even though we have these big features, we're still very DIY. We do so much ourselves. We have like all of our merch. Literally, we design basically all ourselves. We do it all ourselves. Like, there's so much that we do ourselves that is like, I just don't, I don't need anybody's help. I know what I'm doing. You know what I mean? I've been doing it for so long. I'd rather do it the right way. You know, I'd rather do it our way, you know, and I think it speaks to our fans, and because we have such a deep connection with what we do. You know, it just kind of helps it, you know, grow.
Well, I mean, there's something in there, and it's funny because, like I said, I kind of went back and kind of quickly went through the episode you did with Scott, just to kind of refresh my memory, because it's like at that point, I think it was just out of the pandemic lockdown stuff. So potentially, I think I remember you saying like we were writing 30 songs for this upcoming record, and I was trying to remember the timeline. Would that have been essentially what is the record that came out last year?
Yes,
that you were working
it
on?
is.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
so much has changed even from that episode, because it's crazy, because during that episode we were technically like homeless as you know, label
Yeah,
band
I think I
wise, you
remember
know,
that. Yeah.
because we were in this super weird position with our label, because they were like I don't know, it's hard to explain, but basically the pandemic, they had to do some cuts for bands, right? So like they lost Islander, they lost a few other bands, you know, and I think a lot of that was just the developmental stuff, because
Mm-hmm.
it was very, very hard during COVID to release anything that was developmental, because you couldn't go on tour, right? And that's
Right.
how people develop new fandoms, or they discover a new band, you know, extremely, you know, outside of, I guess, TikTok, you know, which we've had a lot of success on. And that's kind of a big thing for us too, is like, you know, during that time, we weren't releasing new music when I did that interview. You know, we were working on the record, and it just wasn't there yet. And the funeral portrait, what it is now, was not there when I had that conversation with him, you know, and, you know, what we are now has evolved so much. And I'm so hyped and so excited and happy of what has happened the last few years, you know, and so thankful for our label. For believing in us and giving us kind of a second life or second chance, you know. And a lot of that, though, came, again, going back to DIY, came from us. Came from us
Mm-hmm.
grinding on TikTok. Came from us grinding on socials. Came from us grinding at small clubs for many years, you know, past COVID, you know, and before COVID, you know. And I think that is ingrained in us. And so no matter what happens with this band, no matter how many sold out shows, like tonight here at the Brooklyn Bowl, like this big venue behind us, like, it's sold out. It's crazy. It's going to be 1,000 kids in here. And guess what? I don't care. I'm still going to the merch. I'm still meeting everybody.
I think something that really, again, memory kind of striking me was in the moment of checking out that episode with Scott, and then even kind of thinking about everything now, is in the few interviews, just to kind of get an idea of your cadence of talking and so forth. It was really interesting to hear you say like these things, like, you know, something that stuck out to me and something I talk about on the show all the time is pivot points. And so to kind of give a reference, like I started off like knowing I love music, wanted to do something in it, didn't know in what capacity. Tried the band thing, that really wasn't for me. Started booking shows, kind of learned a lot from doing that. Then ended up
Did you
writing
lose
about.
a lot of money?
No, thankfully I was always scared to lose money. So I think that made me
Oh,
never
okay. You
take
played a
anything
little.
on more than I could.
That's smart.
Because I
That's
never,
smart. Very smart.
yeah. Well, I learned that from the other side of being in a band and going 10 and a half hours to Tennessee and then getting fucked. And then I was like, this is awesome. So all of that said, like went then into writing about shows and kind of doing small interviews and stuff. And then eventually moved into this space, which I think really kind of allowed me to hone everything I've learned from everything that I've done and kind of be more of what I am, which is a talker. And in all of that, though, I called those pivot points because I knew I wanted to do a thing I just couldn't find. And instead of hitting a wall and being like, I quit, I just found other things to do that I was more interested in at the time. I kind of got the same feeling from you listening to the chat with Scott, because it's like, I remember you saying, like, I wanted to record, and I went and worked at a local venue and learned front of house stuff. I went out on the road with Islander to TM and do a bunch of other things in addition to doing and trying to do my own shit with my own band. And I just kind of wonder, like, do you just have a thirst for knowledge to do this? And, like, you know, kind of getting to the point where, you know, just kind of the commitment to the life, I guess.
Well, for me, is I am a lifer. You know, that is something that a lot of people don't understand. I've been doing it since I was 14 years old. You know what I mean? Like I literally was like 14 years old when I started this. You know, I literally worked at an all ages club, 300 cap venue. It was a little shithole called Swayze's in Marietta, and it was no alcohol. You know, but we would book shows like Bane and Comeback Kid and Terror and Fall Out Boy and My Chemical Romance, or whoever it was at the time before they were big, right? When those bands were playing to 100 people, or maybe tops 300 people, you know? And for me, I learned so much from that era that I was like, this is what I want to do. I don't care about anything else. I want to do music, some DIY punk, rock, you know, music. And I'll do whatever it takes to get there. And so to get here, if I wasn't the tour manager for Islander, or if I wasn't the tour manager for Tyler Carter, or if I didn't lend out my van and drive through the night for this band called Issues, you know, I did that multiple times for that band. If I wasn't for that, I wouldn't have gotten to where I was, because all those opportunities brought me to here, right? And open this door, open that door, open this door. Or I learned from there, which is even cooler and better, because those things, I think learning, so that way I know what to do here, right? So when I get into that room, I know what I'm doing. I'm a pro, I'm a master. And that's what my band is we have mastered the craft of being a band. So that way, when we got the Five Finger Death Punch tour that we got last year, we went from doing 250 cap rooms 2 months before that to doing a stadium and arenas and amphitheaters. And guess what? We didn't have crew. We had the same front of house guy. We had the same content creator. We had the same merch girl. Like, we didn't have any other crew. Guess what? We crushed it every single night, and everybody's on that tour loved us. And because we know what we're doing. We do this, and I'm not sounding cocky. I'm not trying to sound cocky. It's we put in the time, and I think that's what it is. It's a lot of bands, they skip those steps, and then when they get to this point, they just can't hang. And I want them to, because some of my favorite bands have broken up because they just can't hang, right? And people need to put in the work if they want to last forever. And that is something that I want more than anything. I want to do this when I'm 50 years old. I want to play in the Funeral Portrait. I want to be the singer of the Funeral Portrait. I don't care if I'm playing 1,000 cap rooms still. You know, I don't even care if I'm playing 500 cap rooms still. Whatever it is, you know, the idea is that my kids, or, you know, the people that come and see us, believe in this and they want to do this, you know, and they believe in this band, and I'm going to give them that show, and I'm going to do it because I'm a lifer.
Well, I think the thing that's kind of crazy, and something interestingly talking about archers, you know, I had gone with my wife and a friend of ours, Dale, that works at the intersection and St. Andrews Hall and a few other venues. I don't know if you've seen him. Big, little Dale, but he's very big.
Yes.
Okay. So we went to see archers when they were out with Nerve and somebody else I can't remember off the top of my head.
Oh my God, what was the other band? Oh my God, yes, I know the tour, because I saw that tour in Atlanta. So
okay, so it was a thing where, like, my wife really liked archers, found him I think through TikTok or something. I'm not on it. I don't get it. I'm old. And was a thing where I went, and I remember just being like, "There's a lot of people at this show." Like, I think it sold out, and then on top of that, I was like, every band sounded great, had great sounding songs, all this kind of stuff. And it was a thing where, and I've really kind of been fixated on this a little bit lately, where I'm like, I feel like the entry point for like a local band, even, like, everyone can sound fucking great now. And it's like the days of going to see a smaller, like, First to Four on an all local band, and they fucking suck. And it's like their gear sounds terrible. Like, just everything about it sucks. And then, like, I don't feel like there's that anymore. Like, I feel like that step is gone. And it's weird to me that there's not like the separation anymore. It's like what I saw with Archers in that show in like a 300-400 cap room, like you're saying, or even smaller, I think technically, it's just crazy to be like, it sounds just as pro and looks just as great, and the songs are just as good as going to see someone in like a stadium or arena. And it's wild because it's like you said, we have a front of house, we have all these things that everyone now has, and I feel like the playing field has been leveled, and it's just kind of crazy to see that now.
Yeah, I mean that's a huge point. I mean that you have to have that if you want to do this, right? It's
Yeah.
like the use of amps now, right? Like I don't know a single band that uses real amps. They use modelers, right?
Yeah.
They have in-ear monitors and all that kind of stuff, and they have a front of house because you have to.
Yeah.
This is where music is now, and that's where it is. It's just like being on TikTok for a band. You have to be on TikTok. You have to be posting. You have to create content. You have to. It just is what it
Yeah.
is. Get over it. You know, I tell bands all that time. You know, they're like, where do I start? What do I do? I say, just do it. Just do it. Create content. Just get out there, do something that's you, be you, and it'll work. And guess what? 9 out of 10 times it works.
So I have kind of a weird question because like something that, like I said, kind of studied the Scott Bowling interview and just kind of some other things, looking at your socials and so forth. It seems like you have got a pretty good idea of like what the band is, what it's supposed to sound like. And there may have been iterations given the fact of like, that's where you were at the time. And I understand that. But I mean, like, it seems like you're very much like thinking about sonics, thinking about production in a live show, thinking about what a video looks like, thinking about every little minute detail that goes into your career. And it kind of makes me wonder, like, and it's such a weird parallel to make, but it's like I got to see Ice Nine basically right as they were about to break. Like when Horrorwood had just come out, they were the second of four, with the Atreyu and everything. I've told the story ad nauseum, but to see the progression of what that band has done, where they reinvested it in themselves and stuff like that, I feel like you are very much in that same space where I think like as you keep growing, you're going to keep putting the money back into what you do. But I wonder, like, obviously Spencer was on Suffocate City. I would assume you've spent some time with him. When you have an opportunity like that, like, do you pick his brain about how to maybe maximize the opportunities on a smaller scale budget to make the money stretch? Do you take advantage of like
Yeah,
those kind of opportunities?
for sure. I think, I've known of Spencer literally forever, booking shows and doing that. Getting to know him on a personal level was definitely more recent within the last like 2 years. But the thing is he's a very smart guy and he
Mm-hmm.
surrounds himself with a lot of smart people too, right? And which is very important. That's just as important as being smart, right? Is surrounding yourself with smart people. And he knew early on that what he had, and he finally found it with that first record, right? Really, really, Silver Scream won, right?
Yep.
Then he was like, okay, well, let's do it again. And it doesn't work, and it worked. Guess what? I have a feeling, I'm not going to spill the beans because I know nothing. I literally know that. Are they going to release part 3? I think everybody thinks of it. I don't know. I don't even know if maybe Spencer has talked about it before. I don't know. But the thing is if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? It just gets bigger and bigger. Their production gets bigger and bigger, and I think they are doing the right thing. I think
Mm-hmm.
they have the fandom. I think, to me, Ice Nine is almost the new. They could be the new version of like ICP with Juggalos, right?
Sure.
I think they have tapped a market. I think Spencer really tapped a market that needed to be tapped with horror, right? But I think it also has gotten bigger than just horror fans, right? I think it's just a little bit of everybody is now loving them. And,
Yeah.
I think the guy, again, he loves that stuff. That's just who he is. The guy just likes horror. And guess what? He made a band that is horror. And it's the same thing with us. It's like, I like emotional rock music and I'm obsessed with it. And so guess what? I made an emotional rock band, and it has lore and has these icons and creatures and outfits and production. And that's what we're doing. All the music videos we've ever done, very small budget from the label, a massive budget from our band. You know what I mean? And that's because I need it to look good. I want it to look good. And the same thing goes from Spencer. Spencer, same deal. Small budget from the label, massive budget from his bank account, and that's the way it has to be done because he has that vision. And if you don't believe in it, Your fans aren't going to believe in it. The other people that hate you aren't going to believe it, right? Like, you're trying to impress as many haters as you are lovers, right? At all times. So it's one of those moments of just being like, all right, double down on everything. And this is something on our record, we didn't start the recording process of this record to have like a full concept and, this world of Suffocate City. That came because we were like, we need to do this to survive and to be like the band that we've always wanted to be. So we made it happen. But the next record, we could actually double down on it and be us more than ever before.
Well, I feel like what gets kind of interesting in that, a few things, it kind of reminds me of like my friend Andrew that's now in Dance Gavin Dance, but I know him from Idola when I booked
Yep.
shows. That's how I ended up finding
Oh,
about
I
him.
love
And then
that.
ironically, Joe from Ice Nine was who shopped them to me when he was booking talent buyer,
Yep.
essentially.
So
So
yes, I know.
it's
So it's crazy
funny
because
to
I've known Joe forever because he was in a band called Venetia Fair
yep.
back in the day, which I was obsessed with, which I thought should have been the biggest band in the world. And then at the time, then for a little bit there, he was an agent,
Yep.
So and then he joined Ice Nine, and I was like, yes, thank you. He needed that. He needed that. He's
Yeah.
so talented. The idea that he wasn't in a big band already, and so for me, it was just a big moment. So.
But I think something that gets interesting about it is, you were talking about kind of the reinvesting more than somebody else is investing into you. And I always feel like that's such a weird parallel to make, but it's like, I'm kind of a sucker for Shark Tank. And something that
Dude,
I've kind
that's my guilty pleasure. Not even guilty pleasure.
that's
I
just a great pleasure.
dude, I watch that show
So then you know
religiously.
what I'm about to say. Then you already know what I'm about to say.
All right, I'm ready.
So they always talk about when they're kind of in the pitching part and they're getting into sales and so forth. And the one question inevitably one of the sharks always asks is, how much have you invested into this thing? And another reason why a lot of times they don't make the investment into this person is because they talk about how they're not all in. They haven't gone all in yet for themselves, for the company, whatever. And I just been latching on to that so much lately where I'm like, when someone talks about, oh, I have no debt, I have no this, well, how much have you involved in? Well, I'm still kind of working my full-time job. And I'm like, you ain't getting the deal because you're not all
Nope.
in. Like, you got to go
Nope.
all in. And at least, even if you failed trying to go all in and that's why you're now on the Shark Tank, like, that's a little bit more sympathetic because they understand that you've tried. You have been committed to this thing. And like, I've done that with this. Like, I gave up my job. I did shift and stuff like that so I could do as many interviews as I could at all times, be ready to travel to go to Detroit or Chicago or whatever to do interviews and such. And it just got to a point where that wasn't sustainable to a degree. And it's like, okay, got to reel it back, figure it out. And then now it is what it is. But I think there's so many people, and this is kind of the other thing to the Archers reference. A lot of people aren't willing to do that because I think, from my perspective, you see things like TikTok and stuff like that. And it's just like people are like, well, I don't need to go out and grind and be in a band and play shows and all that kind of stuff, which is where you learn how to be who you're going to be on stage. Yeah.
No, yeah.
And everyone just
where you
assumes
become
that
a
it's going to
band.
just be this thing. And I just feel like it's like, you're not investing in the right parts. You're not going all in. You're trying to piecemeal together a career just to get to the thing where you see everyone, where you're at. And to me, I think the journey of eating shit and driving 10 hours and making no fucking money and all of that, that's where you learn whether you really fucking want this or not.
I've thought about this. There was this one show that we played and there was like maybe 5 people there. And I went to go to settle the show and to make any amount of money, right? And guess what the guy gave me as payment? He gave me an
fucking
open, he gave
Oh.
me an open box or tin of the holiday popcorn. He was like, oh, like my grandma gave me this for Christmas. You guys could have this. And I'm like, you already ate half the cheddar cheese or whatever, the white cheddar. I was like, thanks, man. Like, cool. Like, you have to rub it in my face. You know what I mean? Bands need to experience that a few times before they do it. And I think Archers is doing that. I think all these bands that are on this tour right now are doing that. And that's where it becomes real. And the kids, the fans, they notice it, they see it, and they are there for it, and that's why this is so important. Being out here doing it is so important. Now, does every project have to go on tour? No. But do you expect the cult-like following while just making TikToks? It most likely will not happen. You'll have to be 1 in a million. It's just like the YouTubers, 1 in a million become actual famous YouTubers, and maybe not a million, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with the bands, like just grind it out, do it, just do it. I think Silly Goose is just doing it. That's how they got to where they were. They were opening up those parking lot shows, and guess what? They got better and got better and got better and got better. Yep. Then they've been doing it. So, I remember when Jackson texted me, he's like, hey, how is the setup for incarceration? I'm thinking of going there and setting up outside. Can you explain it to me? I said, oh, there's campsites. I think that's going to be your best bet. Guess what? He goes, sets up in the parking lot, sets up in the campsites. Guess what? Next day they get on DWP. DWP is obsessed with them, and now they're on every festival. And now they're signed to freaking Dave Raff's label, the guy that like used to run freaking Roadrunner. You know what I mean? Like this is real. This can happen, and it's you just got to get out there and do it.
So I'm going to leave you with one last question, just because I think it would be interesting to see where you choose to answer, how you choose to answer this, and what capacity you're going to put it into. Bucket list thing that you want for the funeral portrait, either in a live show, video, whatever, something that hasn't happened yet a bucket list that you have in your head that you want to get to, and it's about getting there. What does that look like? What is it?
But number one, I want to blow up a hearse.
Okay. I'm sure Nathan Mowry can help you with that.
Yes, I've already talked to him. We're the budget. That's a budget thing, right? Because to do it the right way, we gotta need some fire people. We need some people that can help with the fire part, right?
Darby Allen, I bet would be great for you.
Exactly. For yep. You know it. We actually talked about all that, so super funny. But number two is the show. I want to bring the icons out with us on tour. I want to bring the full show. I want the production. Okay. I want more of a theater aspect. I want it to be a musical theater show than with lots of characters and almost acting and stuff. So that's next. That is the next thing.
All right. Well, it seems like you already know what it is, and it's just now the next goal you have to accomplish in the next few years. Looking forward to it. I'm really glad we finally got to do this. I would love to talk another time more at length when we kind of can get really into some more stuff. So
in person,
sure. I have to look and see when you guys are coming around, but like I said,
let me know.
I'll shoot you a DM.
Sounds good, brother. Well, thank you, my man.
Absolutely. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Later, brother.
So that was my conversation with Lee. Want to thank him once again for taking some time while on the tour with Archers. Also, shout out Nathaniel for the kind words. I sent him a message after doing the chat with Lee and basically said all those same things. But it's greatly appreciated to hear that people who have been past guests on here when they're on tour with other bands that are going to do the show, that they speak very highly of their experience and of myself. So very, very gracious to Nathaniel and the Archers crew for the kind words. And also, speaking of gratitude, thank you to Scott Bowling for doing a lot of the heavy lifting for me for this chat. But I think it's a thing, and it's kind of why I don't necessarily like going and listening to a lot of interviews with other people, because I don't want to piggyback off of a lot of the other interviews. But the one that Scott did was really interesting just because of the simple fact that toward the end of the interview, Lee's talking about, we're writing like 30, 40 songs for this next thing, and it's really ambitious, and it's like a concept record, and we're and it was sort of the beginning of where we are now. And it's not very often, especially with a band where the Funeral Portrait, I think, was at that time coming out of the pandemic, kind of on a developmental deal, as you ended up hearing during our chat. But it's a thing where, again, kind of going back to what I said, Lee knew what he wanted, and the band knew what they wanted. And here we are. Like, the Scott Bowling interview was basically the precursor to where we are now. The origin story, I guess, for lack of a better term. Sorry, I've been watching a lot of Marvel stuff lately, but it's a thing where it's just really interesting to kind of see these things and be like, and again, I keep harping on Lee knew what he wanted. He knew that something kind of had to change. He kind of had to take it in a different direction. And it's just paying off. It's paying off so well. And an even bigger part of it, he never changed, and neither did the band, changed who they were along the way. They remained true to themselves and are just reaping in the rewards of the hard work and doing everything, as I always say, the right way. not trying to skip and just be, oh, we got popular on TikTok, but we don't tour. We're waiting for the big tours to come in. We're waiting for the money to come in and do all that. No, the funeral portrait just hits the road. And I know I kind of made a lot of references to Atlanta and stuff like that, but and if you've never been, I guess, or you don't even live there, like I don't live there, but I go all the time, but it's a thing where there's just something unique and undeniable about that area where there's like a street performer that I see all the time, all over Little Five Points in East Atlanta. And I actually follow him on Instagram. And that dude will plays metal. He kind of looks like a pseudo Papa Shango-y looking guy, like, wears like corpse paint and, plays like Deftones and a bunch of other like metal bands and so forth. And it's a thing where he grinds. He'll play wherever he can. And I know that he's doing a bunch of other stuff. And that's just that city. Like, it's the other thing about it, man. Like, it's a city that grinds, and like, it's a community, and it's so many things. And all the bands, between hip hop and metal and all that kind of stuff that come from that area, they just have something that isn't found anywhere else. It's uniquely to them. And, even looking at the band like Silly Goose, it's like, again, Scott Bowling had them on. And I remember the guy, I can't remember the singer's name. He was supposed to come on the show actually a while ago, but it fell through. But that was something that drew me to that band, is they will find a way. And I feel like that's something about that area. Like, they will just find a way. It's kind of even in their sports teams to a degree. I mean, the Atlanta Braves, the year back in 2021 when they won the World Series, like, that's my team. That team, as soon as Acuna went down, should have been out. Everyone wrote them off. They found, players to kind of fill in specific roles. They bonded really well together, and they won a fucking World Series. I mean, even going to, I guess I won't say the Falcons because, they blew that huge lead in the Super Bowl. But even if you go to, like, the Atlanta Hawks, like, Trae Young and, like, that team, they're kind of always underdogs, like, and they just always make it tough for everyone else. But you have to respect them, and you have to take notice of them, and you can't just write them off. And I feel like that is so much of the vibe of most of the bands that come from that area. And yeah, I just love it. So I love chatting with Lee. I hope we get to do another one of these. I hope we get to go a little bit longer next time. But like I said, the funeral portrait is road dogging it right now. And like I said, they will be out supporting Ice Nine Kills. I believe it starts in the end of April and goes all the way through to June-ish, if I'm not mistaken. Dates can obviously be found, Ice Nine Kills website, wherever. Google it, you'll see it. Hopefully, if they are coming to your area, come see them. I think it's obviously going to be great to see Spencer probably come out and reprise his vocal duties on Suffocate City. And then, like I said, they just released a deluxe edition of Welcome to Suffocate City. I know they just put out a new single with Ivan Moody of Five Finger Death Punch on it. So lots and lots and lots to look forward to from this band. And to start wrapping up the episode, if you would like to keep up with the funeral portrait, you can do such over, you can just go to their website, tfpcoffincrew.com. That should have everything that you need. But if you need me to spell it out for you, Facebook at The Funeral Portrait, Instagram at TFP_devotion, and the same over on Twitter. If you'd like to keep up with Lee, you can find him on Instagram at Lee Jennings or at Twitter, Lee Jennings X. If you'd like to keep up with the podcast, simple enough, BrewSpeakPod on all your major social media platforms. Email me at brutallyspeaking@gmail.com with guest suggestions or anything else. And if you would like to rate, review, and subscribe, you know why that is important. Please do such wherever you can. Word of mouth is greatly appreciated. And if you would like to support our sponsor at Rockabilia, that would be greatly appreciated. They are doing a ton of collabs. Been killing it lately, again, doing a bunch of Ghost merch. The Gojira thing that we talked about on the monthly merch minute thing that we did on Instagram Live a couple of weeks ago as of now when you're hearing this. Just so much stuff going on there. You constantly got to be checking up with them. Rockabilia.com. Use our code BREWtally at checkout. Take 10% off your total purchase order. And for the Brutally Speaking podcast, I am John. I will talk to you all next week where I have a returning Chris Dawson of Bury Tomorrow. They got a great new record coming out soon. The chat was great as always. We cover a lot of ground. I love that dude. I can't wait for you to hear it. Enjoy the rest of your week, and I'll see you next time.